Hello, this is the Human Odyssey podcast, and welcome to today's episode. I'm Dr. Reggie O'Hara, Director of Applied Health and Performance at Sofix Synergistics in Houston, Texas, and your host for this episode of the Human Odyssey podcast, a human-centered applied health and performance podcast. Today, I have the pleasure to talk with Heidi Horn, a registered dietitian who I've known for many years. Today, during our discussion, we're going to cover several important topics on not only just overall nutrition, but clinical dietetics, differences between fat losses and weight loss, sports nutrition for tactical athletes and high endurance athletes, and also nutritional supplements, what's risky, what's overrated. So I have a litany of questions for Heidi. I'm probably going to learn a lot myself today. I hope you do too. And we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome aboard, Heidi. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this morning. And I'm really excited about the conversations we're going to have.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and read Heidi's bio. Heidi earned a bachelor's degree in dietetics from Eastern Kentucky University in Richmond, Kentucky, a master's degree in community nutrition from Eastern Kentucky University. She's a board-certified registered dietitian nutritionist, a certified specialist in sports dietetics, a VDOT certified distance running coach, and holds a certification in adult weight management. She has an MS-RD, certified distance coach. She began her career in 2005 as a registered dietitian, overseeing and advising core staff divisions of international logistics companies on corporate wellness. As a volunteer, she educated high school track and field athletes on how to maximize performance. In 2009, Heidi's passion to serve her country led her to switch her career path to work in the Department of Defense with the Conventional Air Force, Marine Special Operations Command, Army Special Operations Command, and Air Force Special Operations Command. She has a unique experience of working overseas at the American Hospital in Landstuhl, Germany, treating military members medically evacuated from the battlefield. Heidi's desire to make a direct, effective difference as a combat multiplier at the tactical level was strengthened while performing these duties overseas. Acutely aware of the demands within the special operations community and their impact on family and friends, she has mastered both the administration and application of tailored nutrition for enhanced athletic and tactical performance. In addition, she has consulted with professional athletes, providing nutritional strategies for optimal fueling, injury recovery, and performance. She is an avid long-distance runner focusing on health, wellness, and athletics her entire life, competing in endurance events worldwide. In 2022, Heidi pursued her dream of starting wellness consulting through Invictus Performance. Invictus' mission is to help clients maintain or regain active, healthy regimens. The website is www.invictusptp.com. And lastly, and most importantly, she is married to a U.S. Air Force Special Operations pilot. I think he's better looking than Tom Cruise, too. And has two children, ages 7 and 5. Impressive background. Again, thanks for being here, Heidi. And, usually for our guests, I don't have written questions, but for this podcast, I actually sat down and was like, what would I want to know? Not only as a runner, but just as a normal person, 57 years old. And I've gained a few pounds and, I work 10, 12 hours a day, and I run at lunchtime and, what's the proper timing of food, et cetera. So here's my first question. I'm trying to lose weight. A lot of people out there trying to lose weight, trying to lose body fat, exercise 5 to 6 days a week. And then, for breakfast might have yogurt with nuts, organic blueberries. And then I might have an apple a couple hours after that, and then go home, do my run. And then the wife makes tuna with eggs, doesn't put any crappy mayonnaise in that as well. and I just eat it plain. I don't eat it on toast. And then the problem becomes, because maybe I don't have enough calories, right? That might be equated to maybe 600-700 kcals. When is it the best time to stop eating if you're going to lose weight? So for example, let's say I go to bed at 8 p.m. So if I get home at 5 o'clock, should I say, just eat my dinner, right? Between 5:30 and 6. And then after I eat my dinner, nothing else, right? Like no snacks, not even an apple, not even a banana. Can you explain to not only to me, but for people out there with this similar issue, what is the best timing and when should I eat most of my calories? Am I doing it wrong? Should I eat like most of my calories at lunchtime, like my mom used to tell me?
Right.
She would run 3 miles 3 days a week. She was very thin, great runner. But she would say, I can eat anything I want at lunchtime. I'll have a hamburger, onion rings, right? But then after that, your calories, you shouldn't have many calories. So kind of elucidate on what is the best practices.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's so loaded, Reggie, because it's really individualized. You don't
Yes.
want to eat too close to bedtime because then we could talk about other factors. It affects like your HRV. You need time to digest the food. But ideally, I would say if you had time in the morning, that would be the best time to exercise. So nothing comes up later in the day, and then you get the calories that your body needs, depending upon what the workout is. If you're running in the morning, if it's high intensity exercise, ideally you want something to eat, those 30 to 60 minutes before. And even if it's something that affects your GI, even like a smoothie, something that's really easy to digest, ideally 30, 40 minutes before exercise, that would be fine if it's high intensity. If you're just going for an easy run, not too worried before, but like you said, immediately after, like if you're having that yogurt and some granola, adding, whether it's fresh, frozen berries, and really getting those healthy fats because of the anti-inflammatory benefit, and then just because of the calories. They're higher in calories, easier bang for your buck afterwards. And then ideally about every 3 to 4 hours, after that breakfast recovery, try to get some protein with some good fat, just for that brain, the cognitive health, and then also just to get those calories that your body needs throughout the day.
So for the brain health, Heidi, I remember, that I was working in the research labs that I had Dr. Brenda Moore. I don't know if you remember Dr. Moore.
Sure.
She was a PhD microbiologist in nutrition. Every day she would sit behind me at lunchtime and she would eat, no kidding. She would pack her lunch. She would eat every 2 to 3 hours because she had hypoglycemia issues. But I repeatedly saw her eating tuna, plain tuna. She might throw some chopped eggs in there, right? Give it a little flavor. And I said, Dr. Moore, why do you always eat tuna? She goes, it's the best brain food beside eggs. So is this true? Is actually tuna one of the best brain foods? And what are some good brain foods? Like after someone does maybe a midday exercise and they go back to work and they're like, I'm in cognitive overload. What are some recommendations you would have of kind of refueling the brain? Because it's, it accounts for roughly 25% of your total caloric expenditure based on, the rigors of your work.
Sure. No, that's great. And that is, we see more and more in the research, probably like you have too. And Dr. Brenda Moore, same thing. Like the protein is exceptionally important in regards to that cognitive health, just to keep up with the demands of the job, the austere environments. So tuna is excellent. Tuna, salmon, add a little bit of olive oil or some guacamole or some avocados, with it, getting those healthy fats as well. For the cognitive, or nuts, seeds, the sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, all those would be excellent. Like with an egg or some kale, some good vegetables that are also good for that cognitive, antioxidants later in the day. And then have a little bit of carbohydrates, whether it's coming from the fruit or you want like a sweet potato, some good whole grain brown rice, have a good meal post recovery. That would be important. And I think, like you said, Reggie, just that hydration factor, we can't forget to
Yes.
stay hydrated. Most of us get busy. And then before we think about it, we're like, I haven't had much water today, which
Yeah.
is important in regards to performance and in regards to that
Well,
cognitive.
yeah, it's huge. The hydration factor, and I've been doing this for over 20 years, even when I was at Wright Pat at the labs there, Brooke Army Medical Center, my last station in Fort Bliss, Texas. It's just a habit. Morning time for me is like, even though I'm at work very early, but I'm getting to be old, Heidi. My joints aren't like they were when I was, used to see me run. So midday seems like a cognitive booster for me because I'm in the office very early in the morning. So around 11 o'clock, I've already put in 5 or 6 hours. And then, my wife, Carrie, always has to remind me, here's your thorn. Have you had your electrolytes? Of course, you helped train her when she was going through her cancer chemotherapy, radiation therapy. So she learned a lot, and we used this thorn product. So I think the hydration factor, people don't account for that. Just not about the food, right?
Yes. Yeah. And especially depending where you live, like you're in Texas, Reggie, and we're here in Florida. In those summer months, it's even more vital, because of the heat and the humidity. And if you sweat a lot, you've got to replace those, the electrolytes that you've lost, not just the sugars, of course, but the electrolytes is, what's really important. That magnesium, the sodium, the potassium is really important in regards to the, those electrolytes.
Heidi, one question. Almost everybody now, as you probably know, has a scale, right? And it can be your friend or your enemy. And now they even you can do bioelectrical impedance on scales, which is pretty inaccurate, but at least it gives you a ballpark figure. Is there like a crude estimate? So someone goes out to do their run or their activity to determine if they're dehydrated. Is it based on, some people sweat more, some people don't sweat as much. Depends on, there's a lot of environmental and individual physiological issues. Is there any way to just get a crude measurement of how much fluid do I need, right?
Sure.
Because a lot of people are like, well, I could overhydrate.
Right. Sure. And like you said, that is really individualized. So even like you said, Reggie, if it's using, a scale before you go out and run to see what you weighed, and then you run and you come back, you're going to have to do it immediately, after that run to see what the change in the weight is. There's different hydration tests, like the MX30 different hydration tests that you could also do that show if you're dehydrated. But again, it's something that is individualized in knowing how much you said you drink throughout the day, just not water, because you'll need electrolytes, depending where you are and how much that you drink throughout the day, especially with the sweat loss. Or like you said, if you're in the military and depending upon what you're wearing, what equipment you have, if you're carrying all that equipment too, and starting that earlier on in the day too, getting hydration, even electrolytes, we sleep overnight, first thing in the morning. A lot of us may not be well hydrated. Sometimes I'll tell individuals, let's start out just having a little bit of electrolytes just to help maintain that balance.
So when someone wakes up after, you do their 8 or 9 hours of sleep, hopefully they're getting at least 8. And should they right away, basically in their mind say, I'm probably dehydrated, even though it's not a thirst mechanism. I'm not thirsty, but is it a good idea to just drink, is it 8 ounces or is it 16 ounces? And should it, because most people, I don't know if you've had this experience. I know personally, I hate water, right? Unless I've actually gone out and done a rigorous activity for several hours, I don't want to drink water. So is there a recommendation of when I wake up in the morning, anyone wakes up of, okay, well, should I have 2 glasses? Should I have one cup, 2 cups?
Yeah, ideally having that 8 ounces in the morning, before you reach for that cup of coffee, some caffeine, especially if you're going into exercise. I mean, coffee is always good, as a pre-workout, but having a good 8 ounces of the water first before you would have the caffeine are just going into exercise without anything to drink. So yes, ideally. And even there's certain like the herbal teas, like passion fruit's a really good one. I'll use with a lot of my individual clients is try something in the water, a little bit of fruit, the lemons or the limes, the veggies or the fruit, fresh mint. Like you said, because most of us, we get tired of water. We want something else besides water. So the filtered water with some, fresh herbs is fine too.
I think a lot of people, I know I've been guilty of this, are in a dehydrated state more than they actually think, especially if they're doing any type of activity, right? But they're really, because as you noted, they get very busy throughout the day, and usually they're going to take some stimulant to keep their cognition at peak so they can get through the workday. And they're not thinking about these issues we're talking about hydration, which can help with your brain function. It's critical. And then the electrolytes that should be included in those. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about the supplementation, what's good, what's bad, but very important. So I want to jump real quick into, for, the first domain of this I wanted to talk about was more of the clinical side. So, when we're dealing with someone that's had cancer, there's many different types of cancer. My wife went through this. She had a double mastectomy, went through radiation therapy. Thank God we had you. I mean, you were fantastic. The first thing I thought about, as her doctor, her oncologist comes in the room and says, well, you need to exercise 3 days a week after all of this on, during radiation therapy, if you exercise 3 days a week, of course, I mean, how many people are actually going to go do that? Like what I saw with my wife was complete fatigue, headaches, nausea. It's just, it sounds good on paper, but in reality, this does not really fare well, right? It's like a day-to-day thing. How do I feel today? So, and then the next thing I thought about is, well, nutrition is probably going to be a critical part of this. And hence why I said Heidi Horn. So you definitely helped her. What would you recommend in this case, like what my wife went through? Someone has their surgery, they recover, now they go through their 6 weeks of radiation therapy, now they recover, and now they're on either my wife was on oral chemotherapy, for 2 years. She just came off of it, which that has a host of side effects that I won't go into. But in that situation, what are some of the recommended nutrition strategies you would have for these individuals?
Yeah, great question, Reggie. And first, looking at individuals, seeing what they're doing, like actually have them keep a food log. Like, what are you doing so we can make small changes that would be beneficial to what they're doing? And like you said, a lot of times there may be other side effects. They may get that metal taste or they're very nauseated. So just simple changes, what they feel like eating, getting the fruits and the vegetables are really important. Those anti-inflammatory, antioxidants, beneficial for the body. Really watching the sugars, because of the inflammation process. Try to decrease any sugary beverages. And then really looking at protein, where's the protein coming from, just to help with the inflammation process too, some lean protein, what they feel like eating. And sometimes, I've seen it many times dealing with the cancer patients that we have, they may not want to eat the protein or certain smells affect them. So looking at like protein smoothies or, different shakes that they can do to get the protein that their body needs. And then really those healthy fats, again, coming back to like the nuts and the seeds, in the guacamole and the flaxseed, can we add a little bit to the meals or to the smoothies? One is just help, satisfy as well, but then just the benefits from the anti-inflammatories and also just the fiber, which is really important for that gut health too, as they go through the process as well. And then hydration, like we talked about, just really trying to make sure that they, like you said, the headaches, some of the other side effects that you get, you just don't feel it with that nausea. Looking at some of the bone broth or, some of the broth that's out there. Ginger is a really good one. Adding ginger to some of the foods or the soups just to help with, the side effects that come along with cancer.
Touching on that, the gut microbiome brain axes, the gut is the key. So if especially with immunity. So, what would you recommend in that case? Someone says, my gut microbiomes, I always have digestive issues. It seems even when I eat healthy, I still have some gastrointestinal issues. Instead of me running out to go see a doctor and get a pill, which is probably going to cause another host, 8 to 10 more side effects. What are some strategies I can start with making my gut healthy again? What would you recommend for someone that says, I need my gut to be healthy? I need my immunity to be enhanced?
Sure. Yep. That's great. So yogurt's really good, like a good yogurt with, a couple different probiotics. And then adding, whether it's, some fresh like berries or the frozen would be fine. And flaxseed oil, anti-inflammatory, really easy on the gut. And even a little bit of curcuma, just for that inflammation process too. Also good for the gut. And then if you want a little bit of local honey, which is good, or you could add again those pumpkin seeds. But the flaxseed oil is really important for that gut. Just working overseas too, we did a lot in Europe with flaxseed oil, just the benefits on gut health, cancer, inflammation. So it was very interesting in regards to the gut, what you could use. So the yogurt and the flaxseed would be beneficial there.
I don't think a lot of people understand how important the gut is, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
is it also, I mean, if you don't have good gut microbiomes and your immunity is going to go down, and has there been any tie to that to weight increase as well? I haven't heard of anything, but
Yeah, I haven't heard of it, but I mean, there's so much, like you said, coming up, just your research, just reading stuff about perimenopause and menopause in regards to the hormone effects, of that poor gut health. So possibly, I think there's much more
yeah.
that we can learn from gut health and, longevity as well. More good research in that area.
So let's jump into someone. I go to my doctor. What is the first thing a doctor does? He draws your blood and says, let's see what your cholesterol is. Let's see what your total cholesterol is. Let's see what your high density lipoprotein, your HDLCs are. Let's look at your triglycerides, right? So for someone, for example, if someone, they draw the blood, they examine it, and the total cholesterol is over 200, but the high density lipoprotein, the good cholesterol, is 60 to 70, right? And the triglycerides are also high. Should that person be that concerned? Would they say, well, my high density, the good cholesterol is high, the higher the number, the better. So I'm good because it's scavenging all those fatty deposits out of the arterial wall. Is that a good approach, or should they be concerned about their total and their triglycerides?
I think the total and the triglycerides, just because of what we know on the triglycerides, just in regards to blood sugar. And we know if those triglycerides are higher, that can lead to diabetes or just the inflammation process. When we talk about supplements, we can talk about what would be beneficial for the triglycerides. But I think it's looking at what are they doing in regards to diet? Are they eating out a lot? Do they have a lot of highly processed foods? Is there a lot of processed, beverages, soda, sweet tea, coffee? Are they using a lot of cream or syrup? So I think it's a good approach to look to see what's happening in the diet, in their lifestyle. Even though the HDL is good, that's beneficial. But I think it's definitely worth a look to take at those triglycerides, see what we can do from a diet approach.
I remember, Heidi, and I don't know how I just remember this. I remember weird things. This isn't really weird. I remember I finished a run on the trails with you one day in another group of people, and I said, hey guys, I'm going to go to out to what's the Panera Bread? Panera Bread, because Panera Bread, I mean, that's healthy. If I eat at Panera Bread, I'm good. And I remember you saying, it's just like eating at McDonald's, Reggie. It's still fast food. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think a lot of people out there think, in their minds, if I just go to Salada across the street and get a salad, and I put a bunch of fun stuff on it that I like, and I'm good. I ate good today.
Sure, sure. Which is true. I mean, that's what you think. You're eating decent. It's soup and sandwiches, decent food compared to just, McDonald's or Arby's, some of our fast food, but you're still eating out. So I think a lot of times we're not aware of how many calories are in those foods that we consume, or it may just be there's too many carbohydrates, not enough protein, or how much, saturated fat. It could be, at least half your day's worth of saturated fat that is in those foods, and we just don't know until we get a food log or we go back and we look just at our awareness piece, and it's like, wow, if you're really paying attention to, like you're saying, the cholesterol and the triglycerides, I mean, there goes your whole day's worth just on that one meal, depending what you have and if you're not aware of what you're doing. So like you said, absolutely. Those Calorie King books, those are really popular back in the day. And I'll still use them today just for the awareness tool. So folks can really go back and be aware of what they're doing, what decisions, what choices they're making when they do get, to eating out, even if it's Panera or some of the healthier selections, that we see.
Heidi, I was really disappointed when you said that, but I was deserving because it was a really long distance run. So I'm like, okay, I need to replenish my glycogen stores. Once in a while, that's okay. Well, but, I want to, and I think what you just talked about is more of individuals having a behavioral change, right?
Absolutely.
Even though I'm wearing this monitor and it tells me my sleep and my rapid eye movement, my deep sleep, my exercise heart rate, and like there's a lot of inaccuracies, so I have to be careful about the numbers on this watch, but it gives me a general 7 to 10 day baseline, and then everything's compared to that 7 to 10 day baseline. So it's more of using this as a behavioral change, right? So if this says, hey, you only had 6 hours and 50 minutes of sleep, your total sleep wasn't very good, then it breaks it down, understanding that there are inaccuracies with it. Just gives you a ballpark. Well, I noticed that, 2 days ago, my deep sleep was much better. And this says my deep sleep's poor. So it's more of, well, what do I need to do tomorrow to increase my deep sleep and increase my total duration of sleep? Is there some recovery intervention I should be doing, et cetera, et cetera? So I think a lot of this is just being behaviorally aware. Like if you go out to eat and you're sometimes you're stuck doing it, that you look at, well, I shouldn't put this on, I'll replace that with this healthier choice. And, is it, Heidi, is it still, I remember back in the day, it was all about portion sizes. The portion size drives me crazy, but I get it. Is that really still practiced today? Should people be aware of, well, I need to eat these types of food for whatever issue I have, clinical issue, but I also need to be aware of, I can't eat the whole bag of chips or carrots because everything's got calories in it.
Right, exactly. And I think, like you said, it goes back to that behavior, like sitting down, taking a food log, depending upon what you're working on. And I think a lot of times, RG, we're just in this fast-paced world. Like you said, if we need something quick for lunch, we may eat too fast too. So just that behavior of slowing down, it takes the stomach, at least 20 minutes to digest, to get to the brain that we're full. So that would be another awareness piece too. Instead of just, you're right, I get tired of the portion size because we're all different. We're all different sizes. And what's more important is the food that we're eating and the benefits that's coming from a particular food. If it's fast food versus we sit down and we have a good meal, but I still think that we just eat so fast. We don't get time for our stomach to signal to the brain that we're full. So we just keep having seconds. Or you go out to a fast food restaurant, you're like, well, I'm still hungry. You've ate less than 10 minutes. And honestly, sometimes for guys, it's even faster. It's just hurry, eat and go. So like you said, you really don't have time to see like what you have in front of you or to taste it. So just slowing down as well.
And that can easily be done. I mean, people can just be behavioral and cognitively aware of, I need to choose slower, taste the food. Okay, I tasted the food, now I swallow the food. And just doing that one mini strategy over time can help with the weight loss issue, right? It can help with reducing total body weight.
Yeah. And all
So
people use a watch, Reggie, like time yourself. Like, because most people have no idea. They're like, I think I eat, pretty decent. But when they time, they find it may just be 5 or 7 minutes, or faster than that because they don't put their, simple strategies, put your
yeah,
fork and spoon down. So it's very insightful, just like you said, from just that behavior standpoint too, like what the individual can work on.
now, Heidi, I've got a question related to that hunger issues. What do you know what the science currently says about or suggests about someone that's in a constant state of sleep deprivation, right? So we say, well, you need to get 8 or 9 hours. I somewhat disagree with that because each individual is different. You might have someone that only gets 6 hours, but they sleep much deeper than someone that only gets 8 hours. Like they get very light sleep. They have more awake time moments during their sleep cycle. So is that that continual sleep deprivation though tied to hunger issues, right? Where your brain says, I'm hungry because I'm so sleep deprived, but I'm not really hungry.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. I think, again, looking just at research too, like if you're sleep deprived, like what does your body crave? Do we find that those individuals, crave more sugar, or they tend to gravitate more towards the caffeine, or is it the sodium? So I think that is a big question. If you are sleep deprived, in order to feel great, we tend to gravitate towards, things that are maybe not as healthy for us. That caffeine in the morning, or we need an energy drink, or hey, we need more sodium, or, that sugar, just going to, the vending machine. And usually it's not healthy vending items, it may be just junk food, the
Right.
sugar and the carbs, not a balanced cognitive meal. So yeah, absolutely. I think we could see some of those things.
So Heidi, with next, let's talk about uh, the testosterone. You
Mhm.
know, guys, it's important for females too, but guys past 40, once you reach 40 years of age, roughly speaking, there's about 1 upwards to 2% reduction in total testosterone, free circulating testosterone. I think it's more like total. So this becomes an issue, and it's really more tied to the age factor. But what are some ways naturally, besides getting testosterone replacement therapy, right? Which there's a risk benefit ratio there. There are risks to that, and there are benefits. So obviously, the benefits must outweigh the risk. So be careful if you're going to do that. Not saying don't do it, but let's do the first route. I don't, number one, have the money to go get TRT, and maybe I've got a immune issue where my hematocrit and red blood cells already I have issues with, and more testosterone is going to create an issue for me. What are
Yeah.
natural ways through food, and we'll touch a little bit on the supplementation of naturally increasing testosterone?
Yeah, and that's good. And just going back to what you just said a few minutes ago, right? You're looking at sleep. It's going to look at diet, but again, looking at sleep, sometimes if you don't get enough sleep, that can affect the hormones. So that would be one thing, going back to their sleep. And then food wise, really having them keep that food log again is a good piece for a dietitian. If you have too little healthy fats, we have found that that can decrease the T levels. So looking to make sure, what healthy fats are they consuming? On most days of the week, do they have good nuts and seeds? The flaxseed, chia seed, looking at, avocados and guacamole, and then just meats. Are they getting good, healthy meats? And then looking at the carbohydrates, if they're on a really low carbohydrate diet too, that could impact your T levels. So making sure they do have good, the fruits and the vegetables where we should be getting the carbohydrates, that's important. If they're consuming a lot of plastic, so doing a lot of drinking out of the plastic water bottles, have them going more to the glass or to a thermos, so looking overall at the diet where we can make subtle, easy changes that they can, do in their lifestyle.
That's strange. We look at glass. You talk about back in, the 50s, 60s, the milkman would drive up to the house and have a glass bottle on your doorstep with milk. Coca-Cola put Coke in glass bottles. And now because, we're going to cut down on cost, we're also going to kill you with our plastic, right?
Yeah.
Because what happens when the plastic's being delivered in a hot truck? Can you touch on that a little bit? Not too much, but touch on the issue of drinking these sodas we drink, our milk we drink. It's not in glass anymore. This causes a serious health issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think we're seeing more in regards to the hormones, changing what we're eating, what we're putting, in our lunches, the container wise, and also just in regards to what we can do, even working with, the military, the airmen, like, hey, instead of drinking all these plastic, take that thermos with you. Look at what heavy metals, if you were to test heavy metals, how many heavy metals, what's in that blood. So from a lab draw perspective, but you're right, it's changed everything. If you look at the water, if you look at soda, they all used to be, glass. And like you said, now because of the cost, it's so much cheaper. We have so much plastic. And I think we're doing somewhat of a better job, just education wise, trying to remove a lot of the plastic and go more towards glass, avoiding those heavy metals, because most of us don't have it tested. We don't look at the labs and how it may be affecting us from a health standpoint, from a cancer standpoint as well, just the different disease conditions, inflammation, how could it be affecting our bodies?
So Heidi, one thing I loved about when you work with my wife is that, and I'm going to have you talk about this a little bit, are blood draws. Who would have known? Right?
Yeah.
If I go into a primary care physician, they're just going to do the basic lab draws because it all has to do with insurance coverage, right? So I might have to pay out of the pocket if I want to get blood draw to determine if I have any heavy metals. So this doesn't go on. People don't do this, right? They don't understand. They listen to their doctor, which they should listen to their doctor, but it goes far deeper than that, right? I call it a deep dive into your health. Because all of us, especially in the times we live in, need to maintain peak performance, both cognitively and physiologically physical. If they're not separate entities. So with that, is there any benefits of the supplementation that can be taken? Like, for example, the ashwagandha. I want to kind of jump back to that before I get to this question. We'll talk about the blood draw. Is it true that ashwagandha, the liquid ashwagandha, can be a natural hormone booster? Have you heard anything on that one? Was just in my mind. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. So that's a great question. And I think we're seeing more in those adaptogens, like the benefits in regards again, but it goes back to those levels, like you said, getting a baseline, like seeing where the hormones are. Like if your if the testosterone, if those levels are low, we may need some of those adaptogens to boost the levels. So getting a baseline, knowing where it's at, and then absolutely, just because one of it could be just a very high stress, you have a very vigorous, you live in an austere, some of those environments that the individuals may be working in could affect the hormones. So going back to the adaptogens, absolutely, I think we're seeing more and more how those may be of benefit for some of us. And even in the perimenopause and menopause now, those are a lot of hormones that we are looking at are those adaptogens. And like you said, just in regards to different hormones, how those may be beneficial. But again, knowing your baseline first before you were to supplement, that is helpful.
Absolutely. And that goes back to the question I was going to ask. At Invictus, you do blood draws. I was very impressed with that. Tell me, if I come to you and I'm like, I want to be a peak performer, and you ask me, what's your vitamin D, what's your testosterone? I'm like, I have no idea. How can Invictus help in that case? What do you recommend based on the services you offer?
Yeah, so usually a baseline, depending what you're coming in for. So if it's performance based, male and a female, there's like a baseline what we recommend. So looking at your vitamin D, and like you said, most people don't know. They may be taking a supplement, and usually they don't know the dosage or what type of vitamin D it is. And that's really important in regards to performance, in regards to that immune health, in regards to, just exercise recovery. And just the aerobic mechanism. So vitamin D is a big one. We'll do iron and ferritin, just because as we get older, we see a lot of times that these decrease. And if you're an endurance athlete and you sweat a lot, you lose iron in your sweat. So we see quite a bit of females, a little bit less on the males, just due to, females and the menstrual cycle, that the ferritin is really low. And of course, you may have some fatigue, and then also just that you can't keep up aerobic wise. They see a decrease in performance in regards to, hey, I was out running, 8 miles and now I can barely keep that pace. Yep. And it could just be a recovery piece too, that they're just not getting adequate recovery. But usually the vitamin D, the total iron plus a ferritin, and then looking at those hormones, especially like you said, as we get into those 30s and 40s, it's really important. Most of, individuals have no idea what are their hormone levels. Looking at the testosterone levels, those are really important. Males and females to have a baseline so we know where they're at and how to adjust those.
Heidi, based on your experience and all the clients you've worked with, when they come in, are you surprised that they don't know their hormone values? Like, what would you say, what percentage actually say, I have no idea what that is? And you, as an educated, registered clinical dietitian, are like, my God, that's so important. Like, is there, what's roughly the percentage of those people that have no idea?
Gosh, I mean, it is very little. Very, very little. Maybe we get like 1 in 10 that's working like with a holistic doctor or a hormonal, doc that does draw those labs. But I'll say more and more, and we're licensed in many different states, it is less and less. Like I said, 1 out of 10, we may have 1 out of 10 that actually know what that baseline is. Wow. Most have no idea.
So this is good. We're having this podcast so people can be educated on, what would you say? Find out what your hormone levels are, because that could be the root cause of some of your issues, right? Like, sure. Find out what those baseline numbers are, and then you figure out, well, what's the actual appropriate intervention for that?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, having that baseline, like you said, going back to sleep, looking at the sleep, looking at, diet, how are they eating? What are they eating? And like you said, just simple changes. A lot of times for folks, they eat out every day at lunch. Instead of eating out 5 days, can you just eat out 3? Just making simple changes. Or like you said, on the menu, just sitting down and like, okay, let's look at several different options. Instead of having this burger and fries, could you do this sandwich, with the salad on, 2 of those days? Just making better selections overall for the individuals.
So, my wife always reminds me, because, she's educated now through Invictus, that we got to eat at home. We've got to, eating out's not good once in a while, but you can get into bad habits with eating out, and especially with Grubhub. A lot of people are tired. If you're single, you're going to go, hey, just call Grubhub. Again, let me order some Panero. It's healthy. Actually, it's just like eating a hamburger. Don't do it, right? Stay away from it.
Yeah. It's at your fingertips, Reggie. You got all those. You can dial this up, call this, and it's easy. It's convenient.
Right. We don't want, if it's convenient, it's probably not good for you health-wise, right?
Right. That's exactly right. Go back to how we used to do that meal prepping, 1 day a week, sit down and make some meals. So that way you have it during the week. When you're tired at night, you don't necessarily want to come home and make a meal. So just making more, whether it's a weekend or a day during the week that you have a little bit more time.
Yeah. I want to dive into a little bit to discuss the difference between fat loss and weight loss. Mm-hmm. Almost everyone now has a scale, right? It's easy. You should be in the nude when you get on your scale. Preferably you should weigh in the morning, right? Make sure it's calibrated on a flat floor. A lot of people have scales, and assuming that they're calibrated and they're actually, moderately accurate, then that gives you good numbers. So, we can't all have our body fat done. We know body fat's important. So can you talk a little bit about, the weight loss as important really than, well, my body fat, it's probably a more important marker, but people don't have access to that. So can you discuss that and how it relates also to BMI and percent body fat?
Sure. Yep. Another good question. So I think the body fat is more important than weight. And you're right. We have scales everywhere. You know, they're in the gyms nowadays. We use them religiously. And if we don't see a decrease, you know, we get all, fixated on it, when really the body fat's what's really important in regards to disease conditions. So I think looking now, I'll have individuals, hey, take your waist measurement. And you can't do it daily. You're not going to see a change on a daily basis in regards to waist. So even doing it every 6 to 8 weeks is more important than weight itself, especially if we're doing the weightlifting. If we're doing that strength training, muscle weighs more than fat. So you may see the numbers go up and then you're like, oh my goodness, it's defeating the purpose of what we're doing. We're not doing the right thing. We're not seeing any benefits. So you'll see the inches come down. You'll see the difference in regards to what you're wearing, the pant size decrease. So I think a waist measurement is becoming more and more important instead of using the body scale. Of course, the body scale, it's important for many reasons, the InBodies and some of the DEXs that we use. But in regards to disease condition, definitely seeing a decrease in that body fat. The higher the body fat is, the visceral fat increases the risk of disease conditions. So just making sure that we're keeping an eye on, body fat in regards to that disease condition, yes, is more beneficial. And like you said, in regards to BMI, and the BMI is not always going to be accurate. You may have an athlete that's super tall, in just that waist circumference, and there's nothing you can do, but the body fat may be within normal, which is what we want. So depending on the individual, I think if it's an athlete, sometimes we got to look outside the box and be like, okay, the body fat's going to be a better indicator because the BMI may still show they're overweight or obese, but the body fat may be, 15% for a male, which is great.
So Heidi, on that central adiposity, we want to get away from where you're storing fat. It's better to store fat on the periphery. Unfortunately, men tend to store, and there's a genetic predisposition centrally, which predispose them to a host of metabolic disorders. So when we go talk about measurement, there's a difference between measuring your waist circumference and your abdomen circumference. A lot of people can't, they're like, where's my waist? You said, what's the difference between waist and abdomen? Where do I take these measurements? How can someone who just is at home, using a tape measure, what's a good type of tape measure? How do they take the measurement to look at from their baseline to, 6 to 8 weeks if they were reducing that central visceral fat, that adiposity?
Yeah. And that's important. So I think, above that iliac, above that hip bone, and I think in person for the first time, a lot of times it's easier to be with them so they know how to measure it and they're being consistent. Do it the same day, like you were going back to when do you use the scale, be consistent, do it the same day of each week. Again, you don't need to do this on a weekly basis, more on, every 8 to 12 weeks would be ideal for waist management, looking at the waist circumference, but above the iliac, above that hip, taking the measurement around, and even doing 3 and getting an average is fine too. Sometimes we'll do 3 measurements and just get the average. But being there visually to help them that first time, a lot of times is easiest too. So they know exactly what they're doing, how to measure the waist.
I think that's really a great point. I don't think a lot of people, in my opinion, you're the dietitian, would ever think about measuring their waist with a tape, like a cloth. We call it back in the days when we did body fat composition, the Golic tape measure. It's actually true, Golic tape measure, where it's a tension regulated tape measure that gives you more of an accurate reading. You can go purchase a Golic tape measure online anywhere. They're pretty cheap. I think they're like $20. And they last quite a while. But a lot of people, they just think, well, I've got to just get on the scale and weigh. It's not really giving them a good holistic picture of their overall health, which is the most important.
Correct. Right. Yep. I agree. I agree with that. Yes.
So quickly, I had another question here. What do you think are some of the most common mistakes people make when they aggressively just say, you know what, I'm going to cut my calories out. I'm only going to eat like no more than 1,000, 1,200 calories a day. And they do it, acutely, really like no more eating these calories, and they do it really aggressively. That's bad, right? Like that could actually have a reverse. It could actually cause them to gain weight. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be a benefit of doing like the InBody, one of those body composition scales, because you have the basic metabolic rate on there. So you have a BMR. And that is, you don't want to go below that number as you're discussing here, because if you go below that number, you're drawing from your protein stores. And you don't want to lose the protein because, that's what keeps your metabolism higher. So absolutely, it's that education piece just to go over them with them. There is a basic number of calories that your body needs on a daily basis. Unless you're one of those individuals that's doing like a bariatric surgery and you're there with a physician, you're meeting with a dietitian, post-surgery there weekly, that's totally different. But in, regards to what you're saying, yes, you could be gaining weight, like you said, which is unfortunate because then you're doing the opposite. You're losing the protein and you're gaining the fat. And that's the opposite of what we want to be doing. So making sure that you are eating enough. And like you said, Reggie, on some of those things, looking at supplements, that's when I would say it's important for supplements because you may not be getting everything that your body needs.
So real quick, Heidi, on the fasting, what have you found working with your clients? Because we know there's different types of fasting protocols. Have you found to be the most beneficial, and how often should one fast?
Yeah, and I think it depends on what is the individual's goals. If it's an athlete, definitely it's beneficial, but it's doing it in the off season. Being mindful of what the goals are when we're doing it, so it doesn't have, a consequence in regards to what you're doing performance-wise. So fasting is beneficial, but again, depending on your workouts, you want to do it around the workouts as well. So if you're going to do it from 7 at night until 10 o'clock the next morning, don't be doing that high intensity exercise first thing in the morning because you have nothing in your, in that GI, any glucose, any glycemic, nothing to run on. So making sure you're aware of, you're educated when to do it, when to have the protein and the fat. As long as you're getting the calories in between those hours, then it's okay. But I think the education piece is important and getting the protein because, that protein is extremely hard to get sometimes, especially if you're not aware of how much you're getting. And if you have a limited time now that you're eating, it's really important.
Right. So what do you think, as far as the special operations community goes, what were some of the biggest issues you found there nutrition wise, like the biggest fueling gaps you found with working with that community?
Yeah, I think there were a couple big ones. I think sleep is really important. Like, how can we help them adjusting to sleep? Just turning the mind off. The mind's constantly being awakened throughout the night. And I will see a lot of times being in the gym, like you said, it's super, super early in the morning. Like they would come in, no hydration, nothing to eat. And we would have people all the times that were nauseated or they just felt sick. It was like, okay, what did you eat? You're doing extremely high intensity. They're dehydrated. They didn't have anything, no liver, no muscle glycogen. So just that education piece too, like how vital it is, even as special operators, knowing what you're doing. And then I think just in regards to recovery, they may be in a hurry to go get a shower and they may not eat until 3 or 4 hours later. And then again, just that dehydration piece, the cognitive piece, the brain fog comes into a factor, just around that recovery. So several different things there.
Heidi, let's jump into the supplements. What works? What's risky? What's overrated? Now, I wrote this one down here. Are there supplements that consistently deliver value across populations, or does it always just depend on the individual?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I mean, there are like vitamin D, we're huge on vitamin D, especially in the military. I mean, just as we get older too, or during that cold and flu season, most of us, it's almost impossible to get it through food alone. So we're big on that vitamin D. But again, having that baseline of the labs is really important. So, in regards to supplements, as dietitians, we can only recommend supplements that are third party tested because of the quality and the safety. As you very well know, you go into stores and there's hundreds of vitamins and
Yes.
different minerals that you can take. But that education, that is huge in regards to dealing with any individual, any client. Again, with athletes, they can't just go and take any supplement. And then the same thing in the military world. It's really important, that education piece on what is okay, how much, Reggie, and then what to look for on the supplements, what logos to look for in regards to that third party certification.
Now, Heidi, with vitamin D, should you be taking it with, is there a certain way you take it? I know I take the soft gel capsules with K. Is that correct?
Yep, the vitamin D with K2. Yep, so vitamin D3 plus K2, that's over the counter. So the K2 helps to absorb the vitamin D,
Got
especially
it.
if somebody hasn't seen it improves. You wait about 3 months, test the vitamin D again, and see how your body is absorbing it. Each of our bodies are different, but we have found the vitamin D and the K2 is better absorbed. And eating it with a meal.
I want to jump in real quickly with caffeine. Caffeine and cognitive and physical performance. What are some of your recommendations? Because caffeine's not a bad thing, right? Like there's definitely cognitive and performance benefits with caffeine, but it's also about the timing of caffeine. Can you tell us the best timing and how much caffeine in one dosage? Is it 50 milligrams? Is it based relative to one's body weight? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so depending upon, like you said, what it is cognitively that you need to do. So ideally about 80 up to 200, depending if you're working on something that's mission essential, about 60 to, 90 minutes before the activity would be to have the caffeine. So usually it's 8 ounces, depending on how bold of the coffee it is. So easily 80 milligrams is in, an 8 ounce cup of coffee. And again, that's 60 to 90 minutes before the mission requirements.
60 to 90 minutes. Is there a better a way to deliver it? Like, would you recommend a caffeine pill? Would you recommend, caffeine gum? Because they have military grade caffeine gum. Have you found that there's a better delivery system people like a little bit more than others?
Yeah, and I think it's going to depend on the individual because you're right. There's that Zen, there's the gum, there's, are you going to go for the energy drink? Are you just going to go for, a cup of coffee? The Celsius, some of those Celsius have, over 200 milligrams of caffeine or, the little shots that you can take. So I think it's per individual, but being mindful as well, how much caffeine that you're also taking in, just in regards to the sleep factor.
And Heidi, can you touch on the Celsius and some of these energy drinks that when people are drinking them, yes, they're getting caffeine, but have they actually read the ingredients that are in some of these energy drinks? Because there's a few ingredients that are almost poison to your system.
Yeah. So, and I think that we're doing better education on the energy drinks, but they're still in there. They're still in the vending machines, and if that's all you have and that's what's available, the B vitamins a lot of times are 1,000, over the percent the daily allowance. And that doesn't even count what you've had to eat and, drink throughout the day in regards to your vitamins and the minerals. But just being aware, like you said, looking to see what's in them, Reggie. And there's so much junk in a lot of those nowadays. And our
Yes.
bodies just don't need those, the extra crap. We get enough of that just from diet alone sometimes. So just like you said, steering them towards, hey, just a cup of coffee is just as beneficial, just that 8 ounce cup of coffee or having, in the vending machines, just putting the cold brew in the vending machines. If we can get that, in some of the units, that's been very beneficial.
Awesome. Heidi, anything else you want to touch on? I think I had one more final question for you, which I was thinking about last night. So after 2 decades of working with everyone from clinical patients to elite tactical athletes, what does, if you just sum everything up we've talked about, what does good nutrition actually look like in real life? Like if as a dietitian, you're just talking to a basic person and you're saying, they're asking, what are good nutrition practices? What would you tell them?
It has to be realistic to your lifestyle. I'm not going to go tell you that, hey, you can never eat out again or you can never have this again. It's not realistic. None of us are going to
Yeah,
adhere to those recommendations. I think it's really working with the individual and what fits to their lifestyle. And like you said, Reggie, there's so many other things, looking at the stress, looking at exercise, like they're all work together. What is your social health? What is your spiritual health? So I think nutrition is a small piece of that, but making them understand like what are simple changes that we can make in your lifestyle. And it may be just adding to that yogurt, some anti-inflammatories. Or instead of like we talked about eating out 5 times a week, we're just going to eat out 2 or 3 times at most. So just those simple changes to make it realistic and just increasing the simple things, the fruits and the vegetables, or, even starting a garden. A lot here will be like, hey, can you grow some of those things? That way it's in your lunch, or can you freeze them, during the winter months? I feel it has to be realistic to that individual's lifestyle.
absolutely. So it really ties in. I 100% agree with you. The physical, the mental,
Yep.
and the spiritual, right?
Yes.
Like they all are synergistic. You've got to have all 3 to reach your peak. Definitely
Exactly.
concur. All right. Thank you, Heidi, for being here today. This wraps up this edition of the Human Odyssey podcast. People can find us at sophicsynergistics.com/podcast. We're also on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts and other platforms. Keep an eye out on our social media platforms for updates on the Human Odyssey podcast and more human-centered content as well. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and X. Heidi, I want to thank you for being here today. It was a great conversation. I hope people have learned a lot about nutrition. This definitely doesn't cover everything, but gives them kind of a general idea of just small micro changes can make a significant difference in your overall ability to be a peak performer, whether that be cognitively or just psychologically, physically, and spiritually. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed being here and talking with you today.
The Human Odyssey is presented by Sophic Synergistics, the experts in human-centered design. Find out more at sophicsynergistics.com. Get smart. Get Sophic smart.